Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Mary Ewert, Executive Director of Final Exit Network, and we're so pleased to have you with us to celebrate not just the release of our anthology there at the end, but the sharing of a story that's sure to move, challenge, and engage readers from all walks of life. As you may know, this year we celebrated the 20th anniversary of Final Exit Network's founding. In 2004, a group of dedicated volunteers formed Final Exit Network, the only U.S. nonprofit that holds that mentally competent adults who suffer from a terminal illness, intractable physical pain, chronic or progressive physical disabilities, or who face loss of autonomy and selfhood through dementia, have a basic human right to choose to end their lives when they judge their quality of life to be unacceptable. There at the end is a compilation of firsthand accounts that tell the stories of the Final Exit Network community. Throughout this webinar, we'll have the opportunity to hear directly from editor Jim Van Buskirk about the process, the themes explored in the anthology, and the journey from idea to published work. We're also pleased to have Final Exit Network Board President Brian Reuter and the director of our Exit Guide program, Lowrey Brown, with us. And each of them will read an excerpt from their anthology contribution. Finally, at the end, we will take your questions, so feel free to drop them in the Q&A as we go along. And the Q&A session will be the second part of this 1-hour presentation. Thank you again for being a part of this special moment with us. And now I'll turn it over to Jim.
Thanks, Mary. Welcome, everyone. So the genesis for this was listening to Brian and magazine editor Jay Niver continually, repeatedly emphasize the importance of personal stories to help explain who FEN is and what FEN does and who we volunteers are. And I started paying closer attention and realized that almost every issue of the quarterly magazine had at least one article about from a personal perspective. And these stories were of grace and gratitude. Once in a while, there was a cautionary tale. And it occurred to me that a collection of these pieces might be a valuable resource for the organization and its constituents. So I'm a writer, I'm a librarian, I'm a voracious reader. I envisioned a physical book, one that could be made available in libraries, in bookstores, at public programs, passed along between friends and family members to explain FEN's unique role in the Right to Die movement. So in a fit of inspiration, late one night, I went through all the back issues and I made a list of all the possible inclusions. And I drafted a sample table of contents and a description, and I called it There at the End, Voices from Final Exit Network. And it wasn't until that point that I realized, oh wait, 2024 marks the 20th anniversary of FEN's founding. So the timing seemed great. So I pitched it to Brian, and he said, oh, that's a great idea, remind me. And then I pitched it again, and he said, oh yeah, keep reminding me. And we won't count the number of times that I bugged Brian. And I've co-edited anthologies, and I've contributed essays to lots more anthologies. So I felt I had the skills to compile this book, but I knew I didn't want to be the project manager. So once the project was approved, a dedicated team was brought on board to manage it. And I want to give a shout out to those team members. Mary was the leader of the pack, but Vienna and Christina and Jenna were just fantastic bringing it to fruition. And we had lots of volunteers proofreading it, editing it. So, I had originally envisioned soliciting some more interviews, more essays, And when we looked at what we had, we thought it's pretty much here. So I solicited original reminiscences from Derek Humphrey, Faye Gersh, and Miriam Coppins, all of whom are pioneers in the movement. And even though this book is not a history of FEN, it's not an articulation of its policies, its procedures, its polemics. It's all personal voices telling their stories. And it offers a never before seen portrait of FEN's committed and compassionate volunteers, as well as our grateful clientele. So I envision this little book as a as an emissary to educate family, friends, physicians on the important role that FEN plays in end of life options. I envision people saying, "Look at this book and let's talk," or "Read the story on page 24 and know that that's what I want for myself." Because as a regional coordinator, I'm constantly surprised and often dismayed at the lack of information or the wealth of misinformation about our options. And I did a local book launch last night, and the questions for the audience were terrific, but they demonstrated once again there's so much information, important information that we need to know, and everybody has sort of half of it, or they have their piece of it. So they might not understand the distinction between medical aid in dying and FEN support services. So every FEN member, every volunteer is an ambassador, and I think there at the end will take its place as an ambassador to ensure that our support services come, let me say, out of the shadows and into the sunlight. So I just was going to read a poetic passage from the foreword, and this sort of captures what the book's intent is. The beauty of this book is that it is more than just a reflection on the past. It is an ode to a vision of the future. As we celebrate our 20th anniversary, we do so with a renewed sense of purpose, eagerly anticipating the opportunities and challenges that lie ahead. This anniversary is not the culmination of our journey, but a stepping stone to new horizons where working toward death with dignity for all continues to be our guiding star. So I hope that there at the end can be part of that journey. And now it's my pleasure to hand the baton to Brian.
Thank you, Jim. And thank you for all the work you did and insisting that we put this wonderful book together. I'm going to read one of the stories about one of my clients named Grace. When we arrived, we noticed the house was filled with objects, both sacred and mundane. Grace sat in her chair, now her only place, and without any trepidation reported that today is the day I want to go home. Grace had lived the last 10 years of her life in excruciating pain from a number of medical issues, including severe osteoporosis that had resulted in a few of her vertebrae cracking while just walking. Each day was a difficult struggle. Fortunately, she had two friends who provided moral and physical support through her trials and who were there present at the exit. Mary was a friend from the Native American community who Grace introduced to her local Sufi group. They shared many Native American rituals, and a very deep friendship formed out of love and kindness. The other friend, Anne, was a nurse who had provided physical support, but had also become a deep personal friend because that is just how one related to Grace. After we completed our formalities, Grace said she wanted to do a little drumming and chanting. Her room had a number of instruments which she began to play, beginning by breathing into them with the sound of a soft breeze through an open window. She also sang with an unwavering voice, as pure as crystal, a stark contrast to her failing body that could barely hold its own weight. It was really beautiful and allowed us to feel that energy build in the room. After the drumming, Grace seated herself in her favorite chair to sing a song with all of us, sitting closely by. She sang, "All I ask of you is to remember me as loving you." She sang the entire song with a smile on her face, so that we could all share her love and know she was prepared to die. And she died peacefully over the next 15 minutes. What a gift it was to witness such a peace and equanimity that was rooted in a greater sense of community and spirit. With the dignity and courage to approach death with ceremony and confidence, heartfelt, natural, and relaxed. It made us all realize the importance of what we do and how fortunate we are to be able to do it. Before I turn this over to Lowrey, I want to say a few words about our clients in general. During my 7 years as a senior guide, I had the pleasure of meeting many clients like Grace and their families. Here's what I would like you to know about our clients. They're highly educated. Most have college degrees. Most are financially secure and have sufficient funds to live comfortably for some period of time. Our clients are rational and thoughtful about their decisions. Most wait months between the first and second visit. They are courageous. They and their families are willing to deal with all the social pressures against chosen death, which can cause some very uncomfortable moments with the police. Finally, our clients are very thankful that we are there and offer this service. Every client thanks us and tells us how much they appreciate us being there. Some even give us hugs. Working with our clients has been one of the most rewarding experiences in my life, and the gift they have given me is that I no longer fear dying and death, and that's pretty special. Thank you. Lowrey?
Oh, thanks, Brian. I love that story. So I was asked to read a excerpt my little essay, Farewell, Brief Friend, that Jim included in the anthology. It was Saturday morning, and I was at the supermarket finishing my shopping before the beer and barbecue crowd flooded in for their weekend supplies. My phone rang, and I pulled it out to see who I would be calling back later. Santa Barbara, California. I knew instantly who it was. I don't get telemarketer calls from there. I hesitated. For crying out loud, I was in the middle of the grocery store. Hello, this is Lowrey. His warm voice answered. Lowrey, this is Dan Greenward. Dan was calling to say goodbye. I had been his coordinator, and though he had been in the able hands of our exit guide since the medical evaluation committee had accepted him for guide assignment, he had touched base once or twice as we had built a closeness through his application process. From the guides, I knew he was planning to exit on Sunday, tomorrow. We chatted about his last few months, his process of reaching out to those he cared for, and of spending time with his wife and son. I had moved into the wine aisle as it seemed to be empty. Thank you for your support, he said. It was such a pleasure to get to know you. My heart will be with you tomorrow, I responded. Did I really say something that generic to someone planning to end his life tomorrow? What was I supposed to say? What words could possibly carry what I wanted to convey? We hung up and I stood there, just blinking back the upwelling of life and loss, and something so much greater than the two of us in our improbable brief relationship that started when he dialed Final Exit Network's 866 number many months ago. Tomorrow, he would exit. He was ready. Today, the next thing on my list was hummus, or had I gotten that already? I blinked again, trying to reconcile my scribbled list with my aching heart. They do go together somehow, the sacred and the mundane. A young fellow considered which peanut butter to purchase. An older gentleman checked his list. A middle-aged woman, perhaps my age, moved distractedly to avoid the employee stocking shelves. And I pushed my cart slowly, the air thick, with an unseen web of connections. Yeah, I still remember him well. He was a really interesting fellow. And since Brian sort of chimed in, I do want to echo Brian's recognition of the really interesting and thoughtful people that we have the honor to serve. And I also wanted to note, given my role, that if there were a group of people cooler than the people we serve, and it's a toss-up, it would be our volunteers. I am routinely gobsmacked by the dedication, by the ethical rigor, and frankly, the intellectual caliber of the volunteers I am lucky enough to be able to work with. Serving in the Exit Guide program is work. It is hard work. It is challenging, and yes, it is incredibly rewarding, but it is never easy. And I'm routinely humbled by this group of people who teach me so much. So to all of our volunteers, please know how much I appreciate you. Anyway, I don't want to get too mushy. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mary.
Okay, thank you so much, Jim, Brian, and Lowrey. So now we'll turn to some Q&A. I think this is a good one to start with. So for each of you, how, why, and when did you get involved with FEN? And can you tell us a little bit about your role? So Brian, do you want to go first?
I got involved with Final Exit Network in 2015 when I was looking for a group of people that I could really like and work with and volunteer at. I wanted to do something meaningful and something that made sense to me. And I contacted Final Exit Network and immediately applied to become a guide. And it was just the right time in my life. I was in my mid 70s and I was looking for a way to make a contribution and at the same time not be overly committed. And I found the most wonderful set of people that I could imagine. So.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Jim, do you want to go next?
Sure. I had been hosting death cafes and met a woman, and she befriended me. And one day she called and said, Jim, my application to Final Exit Network has been approved. Will you be with me at my exit? And I took a deep breath, and I kind of thought I had heard of Final Exit Network, but I had no idea what I had just agreed to. And so I immediately called the exit guides, who happened to be Brian Reuter and Lowrey Brown. So I didn't realize that my introduction to the organization was through the A team. So they explained exactly how this would unfold and what my role could be or didn't have to be. And my friend said, oh, why don't you come over a little early? So I hung out with her. And then Brian and Lowrey showed up. And I was so impressed with their patience, their professionalism, their compassion. And my friend she was losing eyesight, she was losing cognition, she was losing everything, and she was frustrated and impatient. Can't you just do this for me? No, dear, you're gonna get it. Let's start over. It was so I don't even know what the word is. So I came home, I immediately joined the organization. I wrote an article. It ended up appearing on the cover of the magazine, and then I got more kudos or something. And then I met Ann Mandelstam, and she says she should be nominated for a Pulitzer Prize for bringing me into the organization. So she thrust a big notebook of material at me and said, well, give it a shot. You can bail anytime. And so I started working as a regional coordinator, and that was over 6 years ago. And as Brian and Lowrey suggest, talking to clients and the immediacy and the intimacy of their situation and their gratitude, it's just overwhelming and inspiring and sometimes heartbreaking. But I've had friends say, oh, I could never do what you do, Jim. And I respond, I don't think I can not do what I do.
Thanks so much, Jim. So Lowrey, when, why, and how did you get involved? And tell us a little bit about your role as the Exit Guide Program Director.
Gosh, yeah, I don't remember exactly when I joined FEN. I think it was actually shortly before I trained as a volunteer, but I had grown up with parents who very much valued quality over quantity in life. So it was an ethic that was just instilled in me from early on. I trained actually in the same training class as Brian in 2016. And I think like so many of us, it kind of immediately clicked into place. I'd seen some long, ugly, drawn out endings, a grandmother in a nursing home with dementia and things like that. And you realize that if she had had an option that she knew about, she would have taken it. So it just immediately worked. And I just got deeper and deeper involved and have never looked back. So I started, as I said, I trained in 2016, started doing some interviews, then I started guiding, then I started guiding some more, then I got involved a little bit in our handbook because I like to write. And sort of like Jim, I kind of just got hooked in. It's like the Borg, you kind of get assimilated. And so at one point, the woman who had been sort of organizing the guides asked me to take over that role. So then I became the lead guide. And then as the organization sort of grew and tried to get more organized, we brought on Mary as the executive director, and then brought me on as an employee to sort of fully manage the whole guide program and make sure that our volunteers have the resources they need, have the information they need, and try to make sure that we can serve people as efficiently and effectively as possible.
Okay, thank you, Lowrey. And just so you know how lucky we are to have you. I think that you work day and night on Final Exit Network projects. So thank you, thank you. We have, let's see, can you explain the difference between a Final Exit Network exit guide and a death doula, if there even is a difference? I think, Lowrey, you can address this probably.
Sure. I can explain the difference a little. Death doulas are not my area of expertise, but we sometimes do work with them in the work that we do. So a Final Exit Network exit guide, the guides are very specifically carry the role of supporting an accepted client in planning and completing, if they choose, an exit. So it's a very narrow area of expertise for competent adults faced with intractable suffering from one or more medical conditions who want to end their lives. We support them, we educate their family members, and help them plan the whole process. But it's a very narrow window. Death doulas are sort of like the Library of Congress. I think they can serve all sorts of roles at the end of life. They help people get their end of life paperwork together. They might help people complete their bucket lists, help support somebody who is dying, making sure they're getting adequate care, support them if they wish to voluntarily stop eating and drinking, help them plan that. So they have a much broader spectrum. Hopefully that sort of hits it.
Okay, thank you. And this one probably, Brian, why don't you start? Lowrey might have something to say about this too. Please talk about how to interface with law enforcement, family members, friends, and how to avoid prosecution. Brian?
Carefully. As most of you probably know, whenever somebody ends has a chosen death, a suicide, the police are required to investigate to make sure that nobody assisted and nobody encouraged or forced a person to die. So it creates a very difficult situation in which the police are there to see whether you did something and you're there having lost a loved one. So what we do is we caution people, and I'll turn this over to Lowrey shortly, but what we do is say, just don't tell the police anything more than they need to know. But be honest and be truthful about this, because there's no law against a person ending their life, and as long as you don't assist or support, there's nothing illegal about that. It's not illegal to know that a person is going to die. So we just say be cautious and be forthright, but don't volunteer anything more because the police are looking for reasons that you might have participated. So I'll leave it to there. Lowrey, you can add to that.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much more to say. Like, somebody choosing to end their lives is not illegal. Knowing that they plan to end their lives is not illegal, as Brian said. I think what makes those interactions a little bit stressful is, it is, as Brian said, it's law enforcement's responsibility to make sure there was no foul play. And police officer is human as anybody else. If they're coming across a situation that they're not used to, that is unusual, that's just going to get their antennae up. And, as it turns out in our culture, a very well-planned, responsible self-deliverance where the family members all know and everything is well organized, it's pretty unusual. And so it does garner questions from law enforcement. And so that's part of the reason why it's so important to us as an organization to help normalize choice in dying throughout society, so that it isn't so weird, so that law enforcement isn't so surprised, so that the whole process can be easier, both for our clients and their loved ones.
Okay, thank you. This isn't a question, but just to say, with tears in my eyes, thank you for the beautiful and important work you are doing. So thank you for that comment. This one is for Jim. So Jim alluded that the audience last night did not fully understand the difference between MAID and Final Exit Network support services. What is the difference? What is the overlap? And how can we help people understand the distinction?
Well, I'm not sure this is, I'm happy to try to disambiguate it. So medical aid in dying is available in 11 jurisdictions in the United States and requires a terminal diagnosis and a 6-month prognosis, 2 physicians signing off. In many states, residency requirement. In many states, a waiting period between requests. And it is a cocktail of 5 compounds taken in a certain sequence over a certain length of time. So it took me a long time to understand that FEN's support services are a completely parallel universe. They have nothing to do with medical aid in dying. And as a regional coordinator, I often get the question, well, I don't live in a right to die state, so what are my options? Well, FEN serves every state, whether it's, quote, right to die state or not. And we have a different criteria in terms of, we don't require the terminal diagnosis or the 6-month prognosis. So we can support neurodegenerative diseases, cognitive decline, a category we call constellation of conditions. So there's much more latitude. And the only modality that we support is the inert gas method. So many people will say, well, I'm going to voluntarily stop eating and drinking. Can your exit guides be with me? And the answer, unfortunately, is no. As Lowrey said, it's very narrow. We have a very strict process and protocol to protect the volunteers and to protect our clients. So that's sort of the basics. But Lowrey, fill in the blanks of that Swiss cheese.
Well, that was a pretty good covering of it. And as Jim said, there is a certain amount of overlap. In the states that do not have legal access to medical aid in dying, we serve the clients who would qualify for medical aid in dying in another state. And I've even had clients in states that have medical aid in dying who I think would have qualified for medical aid in dying, but we're having trouble finding a practitioner who was willing to prescribe or who was comfortable making the 6-month diagnosis. Some of them have just gotten fed up with the medical system in its entirety and just want to exit outside the medical system. So there's definitely overlap.
Okay, thank you. There's a question about what percentage of our clients believe in life after death. Well, just briefly, Bob Blake has done some research that have included questionnaires for both our supporters generally and also clients. And one of the questions is, about what your religious beliefs are. And I would say, unsurprisingly, a large number of FEN's clients are non-believers. And there also were a number who didn't answer the question, which sometimes indicates also that those people would be non-believers. I don't have an exact percentage, but I can just give you that information that I do have. Let's
Maybe
see.
we could send out a link to that paper because it was a really
Yes.
interesting paper.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Can you speak a little bit about FEN's application process? Lowrey?
Sure. So these are questions actually that people like Jim answer every day. We do have an application process. I don't think, it's a huge hurdle, but we do need to know that people who are looking at ending their lives and who want exit guide support are thinking carefully about their choice and, we can reasonably understand that they have intractable medical suffering. So, somebody's first step would be to chat with a coordinator such as Jim. And if they wish to apply, we ask that they write a personal statement describing their conditions, how those conditions impact their quality of life, what their values are as it relates to end-of-life choice, and specifically what it is that they want from us. So we ask them to put that in a statement. We ask that they fill out a couple of questionnaires. One gets at issues of medical frailty. The other is the research questionnaire that Bob's paper is based upon. And then we ask that people submit medical records to support what they are telling us in the personal statement. Once we get that paperwork, then we arrange a sort of an informational interview with another one of our volunteers. I'm not crazy about the word interview. It makes it sound like a job interview, but it's more just to gather more information about the person, their experience, their circumstances, where do they live? Have they thought about what they might want done with their body if they do choose to exit? Things like that. All of that gets packaged together and sent to our medical review committee that looks it over to make sure that it meets our medical criteria, the sort of intractable suffering standard that we've discussed before. And if somebody qualifies for guide support, that would be what the medical review committee is determining. Does this person meet our medical criteria? Then the individual would start working with exit guides, and it would be the exit guides who work with them, make sure the situation is safe, make sure that the person meets our general criteria in terms of, are they aware of their alternative? If they're going to end their life with us, do they know what their other options are? Are they physically able to do what's needed? Because unfortunately, the laws in this country are really biased against the physically disabled, and we are not allowed to provide physical support to individuals who are choosing to end their lives. And also they work with the client's closest loved ones to make sure that everybody is on board together. So that's sort of what the whole process looks like.
Okay, thank you, Lowrey. Jim, because you do talk to many clients in your role as coordinator, can you explain what kind of cases we do not accept for exit guide services? And that could be after the medical paperwork is in.
Well, Lowrey could probably respond to this more completely, but I'll get a stab at it. As I tell my clients, I never try to second guess the medical review committee. So sometimes, if the person is really young, or if they admit that they have mental illness but no physical malady, unfortunately, as Lowrey alluded, we cannot support those kind of clients. Many times we have clients who have given up on the medical establishment, or the medical establishment has given up on their mysterious malady, and so they don't have medical records. And it's a lot of hoops to jump through, and people are not at their best, and they have to make a decision. Do I want to start this application process with no guarantee that it's going to get them where they want to go? And we've had many cases where the application was approved, but when the client started working with the exit guide, there was some red flags, some things that might put the volunteers or the organization in some kind of jeopardy. And so the process couldn't continue at that point. So it's sort of not, it's a long process with lots of hurdles, as Lowrey said, and it's all about the client and trying to get them to where they want to go.
Okay, thank you, Jim. This person asked, isn't suicide illegal? Actually, suicide is not illegal. assisting in a suicide physically is. And that's why Final Exit Network educates, but we do not assist. Here is a question about how does one become a volunteer? And I'll assume that your interest is in the Exit Guide program. So I'll let Lowrey talk about that. We do have, from time to time, roles for other volunteers. We're always looking for people to submit stories for our magazine. Or to possibly interview. We may have ideas for the magazine to interview other people and write the story. We were fortunate to find right around the time that we were working on the anthology, we already had an excellent proofreader who always proofread our magazine, and we had another volunteer write to us saying that was her particular skill. So she really dove in at the deep end and not only proofread the magazine, but also the anthology. So if you have a special skill like that, you could send an inquiry to info@finalexitnetwork.org. We have a volunteer questionnaire to fill out to kind of identify your areas of interest and expertise. We have a speakers bureau. So if you maybe are involved in Toastmasters or you like to speak, you could tell us about that on the volunteer questionnaire. Have I forgotten anything? No, okay. But on the Exit Guide program, Lowrey, why don't you talk a little bit about that specifically as a volunteer?
Yeah, so in order to volunteer for the Exit Guide program, as you might imagine, a reasonable amount of training is required. So we typically hold a training for volunteers, well, when we need them. Lately, that seems to be every other year or so. And the way we announce a training is we send an email to our current membership. So if you are a current member and you have an email address on file with us, you'll get an email that says, hey, we're planning on holding a training in the next 6 months or whenever it is, and we solicit applications. Our membership obviously is a really cool group of people. They all go together, right? So we tend to get more applications than we can accept for the training, but we do take as many people as we can genuinely use. I don't want to train more people than I can use, because then you train people and then they're bored, and that doesn't serve anybody. And then once we hold the training, that's how you would get integrated in as a volunteer. But it's a reasonable long process. It does require a certain time commitment. And people do have to, you need to have your own computer. You need to be prepared to travel a little bit, things like that.
Okay, thank you. Do you coordinate with MAID where and when MAID is available? Well, I wouldn't say that we coordinate with MAID. We do try to maintain relationships with some of the state organizations that help people understand the MAID laws in their states and whether they qualify. And from time to time, we're invited to give presentations to volunteers in those organizations in MAID states. Both of my parents had Parkinson's disease and passed away this year. They were in facilities when they died and had no autonomy at the end. My dad wanted the right to die for years. It was heartbreaking not to be able to help him with that because of his dementia. Lowrey, could you talk a little bit about the window of opportunity? I think that applies to this this situation.
Yeah, so in the guide program, we talk about the window of opportunity a lot. And by that, we just mean if you are going to end your life, you need to have the cognitive ability to do so. You need to have the cognitive energy to do so. And if you're going to work with the Exit Guide program and use nitrogen, then you need to have the physical ability. So it's not easy. I don't think it's ever easy to choose to end one's own life. But for people who are looking ahead and seeing a future that they really don't want, they're willing to make that choice. It's a difficult decision, and you do have to choose, as I often advise my clients, there's no right time. There's only too early and too late. If you do wish to be in control and end your own life, you kind of have to make that decision while you still can cognitively, and you absolutely have to make that decision while you still can physically. There are backup methods of self-deliverance, such as voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, that are much easier to do physically. And so it's not as though nitrogen or the exit guide program is the last option, but if you want to exercise that option, you've got to have your cognitive wits about you, and you've got to be physically able.
This is a related question regarding dementia. What percentage of people who use FEN's method to hasten their death have some type of dementia? Lowrey, can you speak to the categories of, let's say, categories of illness or disease that our clients fall into?
Yeah, so obviously the people that we serve have a much broader range of conditions than those who qualify for medical aid and die, because we don't require that people be terminal. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I want to say that, our largest percentage is cancer. I'm going to guess maybe sort of in the 20% range. The next two biggest groups of applicants to the exit guide program are, interestingly, people who are decidedly not qualified for medical aid and dying, even if they live in a state with medical aid and dying. And those two groups are what we call a constellation of conditions, and people in early stage dementia. So a constellation of conditions is where you have an individual who has a number of diagnoses, where any one of them alone might not be that serious, but you pool them together and they seriously impair quality of life. Most often, the people who fall into that bucket tend to be people in advanced old age. And you can imagine, if your eyesight's going and you can't read, and your hearing is going and you can't socialize that well, and your joints constantly hurt so you can't move or do anything, the walls are really closing in. So we do serve people in that situation, whereas medical aid and dying won't, because they don't have a specifically terminal illness, even though people in advanced old age are terminal. But that's how the law works. And then, specifically answering this person's question, I want to say maybe 12 to 14% of our accepted applications are people applying with either a cognitive impairment or early stage dementia diagnosis. You do have to still, as I said, be competent in order for us to provide service. But typically in early stage dementia, people do retain decisional capacity.
Okay, thank you. And we have a question that relates to family and friends who possibly have been arrested or had issues with law enforcement. And that made me think about our policy of having the client let their family and friends know, and to make sure that people are on board with that decision. Brian, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I'm not sure exactly what the question is, but as we mentioned earlier, if somebody does choose to end their life early, the people that do the discovery in particular are required to talk to the police, and they have to be informed of that. And as Lowrey has said earlier, we spend quite a bit of our time as exit guides working with the clients and their families in preparing them on how to do the discovery and how to deal with the police. But in general, for most of the cases that we have, since nobody is assisting or doing anything illegal, it's uncomfortable for a day or two while they're going back and forth, but there's no repercussions. We've had one case in the last 10 years, I think, where the police came in and stopped. They came in before anything happened, and that went away. They decided not to prosecute. So we haven't had all that much interface with the police ourselves. Some of our clients have this short period of time after they do the discovery, but in general, I would say it's pretty short and pretty quick. But Lowrey, you have anything you want to add?
I'm not aware of a family member, friend, or loved one ever being prosecuted in a FEN supported exit.
And this one is for, I guess, Brian and Lowrey, in their experience as guides. What exactly does the guide or support do as the client is dying? Are they present and speaking in a comforting manner, or is that up to someone else?
I'll let Lowrey answer that.
Yes, we are, for those clients who wish us to be present when they exit, which is not all of them. Some of our clients are really independent and have supportive family, and they don't need us or want us at the exit. Most do choose to have us. But yes, that's exactly what we're there to do, is to be a compassionate presence. We cannot provide physical assistance, but we can be there. We can be there with the person and accompany them on their journey. And, we try to meet whatever client it is in their place and what it is that best serves them.
And I could just add that on the story I told you about Grace, I will just say that the two exit guides and the two people, we were all sitting around holding hands with her, and we all felt this wonderful energy of her dying, and it was probably one of the most extraordinary feelings I've had, even in all my time as an exit guide. We were there sharing her happiness and all together, and we were just all holding hands, and it was just lovely and wonderful.
Okay, thank you. There is a question about the process that we use. Lowrey, do you want to briefly just
The process meaning the method that we teach?
Yeah, medication or whatever. So the question is, could you explain more about the process of what the exit consists of? Medication, etc.
Okay. So I think it's been mentioned earlier, we operate completely outside the medical system. So we teach individuals how to use publicly available equipment that is all legal to purchase. We teach people how to use inert gas as a method of self-deliverance. It is very fast, it's reliable, it's comfortable. We've been using it for 20 years or teaching people how to use it for 20 years. But we're not doctors, so we cannot prescribe lethal medications. And even if we were doctors, medical aid in dying depends on the law. And so everything that Final Exit Network does has to be legal. So for people who are interested in finding medications and who don't wish to use inert gas to exit, there are books that have information on that. My impression is that it's increasingly difficult to get reliably lethal medications. It's just, unfortunately, modern medicine has gotten safer, and safer, which is good in some ways, but it makes self-deliverance of medications outside of medical aid in dying extremely difficult.
Okay, thank you. Is the anthology a physical book or online? How much is it? We'll be sending out a follow-up email to everyone who signed up for this program. And the book is available at lulu.com. That's LULU.com. If you just type in there at the end, it will pop up. To purchase the physical book, it's $15 plus shipping and handling. There is a $5 ebook option if you prefer that. But like I said, we'll send out that information. Probably you'll have it by tomorrow morning. Are there fees for FEN services? No, our exit guide service is completely free of charge. And that's supported by our many generous members and donors and grantors. So we're very thankful to them. How long does the application process take after you've submitted the application? So the question of timing, I know that we say we're not an emergency service. So it does take some time to go through all the paperwork and such, and I'll let Lowrey chime in with exactly how much time that might be. But we're not an emergency service, and we do encourage people who have questions in general about the Exit Guide program. They can always feel free to contact one of our coordinators and talk about it. And we really are hoping to educate people more widely so that they'll think about it, about how they want their end of life to unfold before they're in a situation that possibly they would consider an emergency. So did you want to add anything to that, Lowrey?
I think that mostly covers it. I mean, once the application is in, the medical review committee needs to look it over. That, we try to process applications as quickly as we can. That might be a couple of days, it might be a week or two. And then once an individual starts working with an exit guide, then the exit guide would start, talking to the client, talking to the family members. If everything is in place and then the client's really ready, things can move reasonably quickly. I think we typically tell people, look, from when you submit your application to exit, it's going to be 4 to 6 weeks at a minimum. But as a practical matter, we find that the vast majority of the time that once people's processes start, once they've been accepted for guide support, people just relax. It is very rare that people exit as soon as they indicate they want to in their application. When they apply, they want to exit like right away. Once they start working with a guide and they feel more in control, it really does bring considerable peace of mind. And so things tend to slow down as a practical matter, not because we make them slow down, but just because people, get on with their lives a little bit. It's actually one of the sort of more rewarding parts of what we do.
Okay, thank you. There's a question about the Switzerland options, and actually we do have one of our coordinators now who is our Swiss options advisor. So if you have questions about Switzerland, either Pegasus or Dignitas, you can contact go into the website under Exit Guide Services, and there is a form there that you can just fill out and say that you're interested in the Swiss option, and our advisor will get back to you on that. Lowrey just said, we don't require people to be terminal. Please clarify. I thought having a terminal diagnosis was required for FEN services. Lowrey?
So no, a terminal diagnosis is not required for Final Exit Network services. We recognize that there are a lot of illnesses out there that can destroy quality of life with no end in sight. Dementia, of course, is the really big one. Even in a state with medical aid and dying, if you have to be within 6 months of death and you have to be competent at the time you use medical aid and dying, you're stuck, right? Because in all dementias, by the time you're within 6 months of death, you no longer retain decisional capacity. So we do not require that people, A, have a terminal illness, and we certainly don't require that they be within 6 months of death. And that allows us to work with individuals who are in early stage dementia or who are in the early stages of some of the neurodegenerative diseases, things like that, that, as I said, they can be long, they can be drawn out, years and years of suffering. And so we recognize that and decided as an organization that requiring terminal wasn't logical and didn't serve the people who needed to be served.
Okay.
Mary, I think you might invite them to look at the video that's on our homepage about the dementia case as a good example of this.
Yes. And to get to that, you go to the website homepage. In the upper right corner, there's the little YouTube symbol. You click on that, it takes you to our YouTube channel. And we have our video, the one that introduces FEN, that also answers a number of questions that you might have. And the other one that follows the case of a man who did exit and who was suffering from dementia. Brian, here's one. What is the impact on life insurance policy requirements?
I think we always say we're not experts in insurance, but in general, somebody who has had a life insurance policy for a long time and they end their life on their own, the insurance company will pay out. In general, we believe that the only time they will not pay out is when somebody takes out a life insurance policy within 6 months to a year from the time they exit. But in general, that in our experience, and we've had a number of them, the insurance company will pay out for somebody who's taken their life as long as they've had it for a long time.
Okay, thank you. Are there many FEN clients with ALS? The neurological diseases, including ALS, we do have a certain percentage, I can't remember it now, but who do access our exit guide program. And again, just remember that the client has to have the capacity to do this on their own. So again, with ALS, you would have the issue of the window of opportunity, and the person possibly having to make the decision to exit while they still had some capacity, or finding themselves unable to do what's required. This is one I haven't come up on this before, and Lowrey, I don't know if you have. Can your body be donated to science post nitrogen exit?
My understanding is that it can be. I think almost all of the body donation organizations, institutions, businesses, they always hedge. They always reserve the right not to accept somebody's body. They might be too full, whatever. But the air that we breathe is 78.8% nitrogen. So if somebody chooses to exit using nitrogen, it shouldn't do anything to the body that would, it's certainly not dangerous. It's not contagious. There's nothing, it shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, thank you. And I think we're at 1:58 now, so I think this will be the last question. To what extent do you coordinate with other organizations to lobby for legislative change? For example, in California, while we don't oppose legislation, we aren't a lobbying organization. We're an educational organization, and so we don't participate in any of the legislative efforts that are happening in the states.
I would also note, since we're a 501c3, and for our donations to be tax deductible, we are not allowed to lobby very specifically.
Okay. I said that was the last one. I'll make this the last one. Where are your guides located? We're a virtual organization, and all of our volunteers are scattered around the country. So with that, I think that we will close. I want to thank you all for joining us today to celebrate the launch of There at the End. It's been an absolute pleasure to learn more about the story behind the story. And thank you, Jim. I want to thank you again for all of your hard work on putting this together. If you haven't already, grab a copy of the book and spread the word. Your support means a lot to both the authors and to the clients who have contributed their stories. As I said, we'll follow up today's webinar with information, an email on how to order the book. And also this webinar has been recorded, so it will be posted for about a month, and we'll include the link in our email. So if you missed part of it or you want to watch it again, it will be available. And on behalf of the entire team, thank you again for being part of today's discussion. We look forward to hearing your thoughts. You can always email us at info@finalexitnetwork.org. And we hope to see you at future events. Have a wonderful afternoon.